Thanks very much, Peter, and I'd like to thank Joe for, I suppose, having this session on climate change at the McGill Summer School and, of course, inviting me here to speak today. And the session title goes to the heart of the issue that we face. Human-induced climate change is real, and we've known this for some time. Actions are being taken, but these are not enough, and major steps forward are needed. I aim to outline some elements of what such steps might look like, but before doing so, to provide you with some context on where we are on climate change. And as Christiana Figueres, who is the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has said, the fifth assessment report of the IPCC, and that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has removed any doubt that some people may have had about the reality of climate change and our role in it. Warming of the climate system is unequivocal and the human influence is clear. In fact, we've had a UN agreement to stabilise atmospheric greenhouse gases at a level that would prevent dangerous climate change in place since 1992. This also includes the goal to enable ecosystems to adapt naturally and ensure that food production is not threatened. The threats to ecosystems and food production are fundamental to the impetus for action. Other threats include flooding and erosion due to sea level rise, disruption of essential resources such as fresh water, and large-scale irreversible change such as loss of major ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, which could eventually lead to several metres of sea level rise. Steps to address climate change include the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, for which a number of developed countries agreed to move first to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The Kyoto Protocol established rules for reporting and accounting of these emissions, and it's also the basis for a series of flexible or market mechanisms such as emissions trading. And these are essential building blocks for action on climate change. The EPA leads on their implementation in Ireland, including providing Ireland's annual greenhouse gas inventories to both the United Nations and the EU. And these are then used to assess our compliance with emissions targets. The 2009 Copenhagen Accord and subsequent 2010 Cancun agreements resulted in world governments adopting a shared goal to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial temperatures. This has long been considered a threshold beyond which climate change impacts effectively become unmanageable. Currently, the world has warmed by just under 1 degree Celsius, and we are on a pathway to between 3.5 and a 6-degree warmer world by the end of this century. If the world is going to have any likely chance of staying below 2 degrees increase in temperature, then global greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced by up to 70% by 2050 and brought to near or below zero by the end of this century. And that's the extent of the challenge that we face. The anticipated agreement in Paris next year needs to put the world on a pathway that enables this to happen. Ahead of that, we have a summit being convened by Ban Ki-moon of world leaders this September. Our former President, Mary Robinson, has been appointed as a special climate envoy to assist in this process and lead up to the Paris Agreement. So that's the global process, and we also have complex EU processes, including emission reductions targets for 2020, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But there's also a range of actors and players at national and subnational levels, and I don't really want to go into the detail of these here, but rather to focus on the we in the title of the talk today, which I take to be as what can and should be the response here in Ireland. And this is really composed of three elements. First of all, addressing the causes of climate change through mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, dealing with the consequences of climate change through adaptation. So that is that we need enough mitigation to avoid unmanageable climate change and enough adaptation to manage unavoidable climate change. In addition, we should be availing of the opportunities that the transformation to a low-carbon, climate-resilient society and economy will bring, And of course, there are economic opportunities for people and organisations in meeting future energy needs. So firstly, to look at mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions of carbon dioxide, mainly of fossil fuels, are the main driver of climate change globally and here in Ireland, where they make up 65% of our emissions. These are largely from energy, but cement production is also an important source. But on the energy side, we need to plan for and move rapidly to transition to zero fossil carbon energy systems by 2050 at the latest. Decarbonisation of the electricity sector is at the core of a low-carbon transition, not just in Ireland, but in all industrial countries. And there's a number of reasons for this. Power generation is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, approximately 21% in Ireland. Low-carbon power generation is well understood and it's feasible. And decarbonisation of electricity has an important role in reducing emissions in other sectors, such as transport, residential and industry. Currently, Ireland is energy dependent on imported fossil fuels at a cost of around €6.5 billion annually. The dependence on fossil fuels leaves Ireland's energy consumers open to considerable uncertainty and price volatility. Ireland's renewable resources are significantly greater than Ireland's national energy requirements, but only a fraction of these are actually being used. There is considerable opportunity for green economic development and generation of skills and employment in the national energy sector. These points, along with Ireland's obligations and targets under the EU and the UNFCCC, underpin the motivation for Ireland to transition to zero fossil carbon energy. To an extent, the phasing out of fossil energy has started, and we can see this in our emissions data, which shows that renewable energy has reduced our carbon dioxide emissions by almost 2 million tonnes in 2012, replacing imported fossil fuels and saving an estimated €250 million in costs of fuel imports and emission savings. This is enabling new industry and employment. However, a fundamental upscaling of low and zero carbon energy is required in Ireland and globally, as the IPCC has indicated. The urgency of this step is also evident globally and in Ireland. EPA projections show that we are not on track to a low-carbon society, or even to meet our existing targets under the EU Climate and Energy Package for 2020. Even under the best-case scenario, greenhouse gas emissions will remain relatively static up to 2020, which, as a result, mean that emissions in 2020 will only be 5 to 12% below 2005 levels and will not meet the 20% reduction target. Missing these targets will entail costs for Ireland and increase the difficulty and cost for achievement of a low-carbon economy. A clear articulation of a national vision for clean energy generation, distribution, supply and use is needed. And the EPA considers that elements of this vision could include, again, zero fossil carbon energy by 2050 at the latest, cost-effective and secure energy from individual to national scale, flexibility in energy generation, distribution and use, and availing of Ireland's renewable energy potential at all levels. To do this, we have to go beyond the numbers and engage with the citizens of Ireland in such a developmental transformation. This must be attractive to people and enable their engagement. For example, people are likely to respond positively to a vision of transformation of their homes and communities that enhance their quality of life and lowers costs while ending our dependence on fossil energy. As the saying goes, the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones. The fossil age must end well before we run out of fossil fuels. For Ireland, the agriculture sector is a key source of greenhouse gas emissions, and approximately 30% of our emissions comes from this sector. It is more complex than energy, and it is also intrinsically bound up with land use. Positive land management can be a sink for carbon dioxide, and this is vital to actions on climate change and not just in Ireland. Most, but not all, of Ireland's land use, that is, its forests and grasslands, are a carbon sink. Areas that are not sinks include poorly managed and degraded peatlands. Given that carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas, the EPA considers that there are three key principles that should be applied to land management. Where land management is providing a sink for carbon, then this sink should be maintained or enhanced. Where land management is a source of carbon dioxide, this source should be reduced or eliminated, and where land is degraded or has lost its function, it should be restored. In practice, these need to be measurable to the highest international standards. The EPA is focused on advancing work in this area, including on how to include these analyses in our national inventory. And we're working closely with the Department of Agriculture in Teagasc on this. But of course, actions are also needed on methane and nitrous oxide as well. These can include use of anaerobic digestion, improving manure management, and more effective fertiliser use. Challenges and barriers, of course, exist, but our farming, technology and business sectors have the creativity and expertise to overcome them and achieve real ambition in mitigation of agriculture emissions. Overall, we need to move to sustainable agriculture, food, forestry and land use system, which is effectively carbon neutral by 2050. Moving on to discuss the consequences of climate change, and I presume John will speak more about climate change impacts, but I wish to make a number of points on this issue. Climate change is impacting on Ireland. It is not just the recent floods that were so devastating in areas of Limerick and Cork, and which had a climate dimension, or the more intense rainfall extremes that we now experience. It is the slow, gradual changes in our terrestrial ecosystems and in the seas around us. As I'm sure people in Donegal will know, cod, a cold water fish, is moving to more northern waters and other species are moving in. This is also happening on the land, and the growing season for certain plants is changing. This will continue to increase until at least the middle of this century. Now, some may see this as a positive and look out at the beautiful day and the beautiful summer we're having, but Ireland will never have a Mediterranean climate. We are a North Atlantic country. It is the changes in that ocean that will dominate our climate, and we need to understand these much better than we do now. But one change will become increasingly evident in the coming years and decades, and that's sea level rise. Our coastal assets, both human and natural, are going to be increasingly threatened. A repeat of this year's storms would have had even greater impact if they had come on top of additional sea level rise of 26 to 55 centimetres, which is the most optimistic range that we can expect for the end of this century. The EPA is working with Met Éireann, the OPW, various government departments and the research community to provide the required climate information so that we can better prepare for future extremes and ongoing change. And we're also working with the EU partners on this. Lastly, then, to look at opportunities. And this is where an overall vision is needed in which Ireland turns necessity into opportunities. Business as usual is not an option, and Ireland has to take this fact on board. We have to decarbonise our energy systems. Let's do that and build up skills and tools that have global reach. We are already at the forefront of key areas of agriculture and land use research. More and more, we need to see Ireland as leading in climate and food sustainability solutions. And we need to have top-class analysis of emissions and sinks for greenhouse gases, including in the complex area of agriculture and land use, and in using advanced systems and tools for this. Again, let's lead on this and bring these skills to others. And there are many, many more examples where necessity can be the source of invention and innovation, but we need the appropriate vision and framework for this. Actions on climate change and broader sustainability also need to be seen as enhancing our quality of life as individuals and collectively, and providing the sustainable economy of the future. Green is the colour that we most associate with Ireland. But let's take that to the next step. That is, by ensuring that green is not just a colour, but that it's a way of life. It's a way of life that is high quality, positive and sustainable. That is a key part of what we in Ireland can give to the world as part of our collective efforts to address this challenge, but we need to start doing this now while we still can. Thank you.